We're told over and over again to show, don't tell, but it's not always easy to spot these instances in our writing. And while Control F can't help us find every instance, there are some signposts which we can use this search function to scan for. Hi, hello, welcome in. I'm Jarek, and I'm an editor, writer, and all-around content creator, and today we're talking about one of the ways in which Control F can be your editing friend. Finding places we're telling, not showing. First, let's throw in a quick disclaimer about this notorious telling. It's not always wrong. There are times where we can and should tell. So be aware that just because one of these signposts exists in your writing doesn't mean that you have to change it, simply that you should consider whether this is a time to tell or show. Consider the rhythm and pacing of your writing, the purpose of the sentence, and if it's occurring in dialogue. Okay, so what phrases should we be looking for? First, let the action just happen by removing started to, began to, started, beginning. Often context does a lot of the heavy lifting in letting the reader know something is starting. Using the words started to or began to are usually unnecessary and often flip our writing into a telling versus showing format. Take, for instance, the sentence, "It started to rain." This isn't a bad sentence, it isn't a mistake. It might even be perfect for this instance, but consider two things. The first one being that if it wasn't raining a second ago and now it's raining, your reader can probably put two and two together and know that it started to. The second thing is simply that there are far more interesting ways to say that the rain started. A possible suggestion could be, "The first drops of rain hit the window." In this revision, we still allude to the fact that the rain is beginning by saying it's the first drops. But we show them interacting with another object, which adds to the setting and the atmosphere. This option is also slightly more immersive by being closer to the character's perceptions of what's going on. Consider also the sound that the rain might be making, or if the characters are outside, the fact that they're feeling the rain. We will talk more about this sensory immersion in pretty much every example. But let's look at another example of this started to, began to signpost. Larry began to run from the masked man. Just like the rain, if Larry wasn't running a second ago and he is running in this sentence, the readers can put two and two together that he went from standing to running or from walking to running. Also, this appears to be a high-stakes situation, and generally shorter sentences and a faster pace will be more efficient at setting the tone. We could fix this by simply removing began to and leaving the sentence as Larry ran from the masked man. Already significantly better in my opinion, it's just a little snappier, but we can go further with our edit. I have two suggestions and it all comes down to context and style. My suggestions are Larry ran or Larry darted away from the masked man. Larry ran takes this sentence to its shortest, snappiest form, so if there's enough context in the sentences and paragraphs around it to say that he's running from this masked man and who the masked man is and setting up that setting, then Larry ran might be the right option to keep that really quick pacing of this obviously, or at least assumed, high-stakes event. The second option takes ran and chooses to use a more interesting and stronger verb by using darted. While we don't always need to choose something that is stronger than ran is a perfectly fine word, sometimes it can really add to what the reader experiences. It's good to consider what other words may paint a clearer picture. Consider all the options and what you wish to evoke with this sentence. Consider how the picture changes if you were to use the word darted, dashed, stumbled, sprinted, scuttled, scampered, bolted, raced. You get the picture. Each of these gives a much clearer but very different picture than just ran. Okay, let's look at our second signpost. Action over being. So this is kind of pronoun with a to be verb. So an example of that would be it was, or they are, or I am. Obviously, to be verbs are a super necessary part of the English language, but there are certain instances where we can do better, because they indicate that rather than the current adjective, a stronger verb could be used. This is more of a problem when we're talking about how someone's feeling or where they are in space than it is when we're talking about like a career or a relationship. To clear that up a little bit, what I mean is it's a problem when we say Louise is sad, and far less of a problem when we say Sally is a doctor. Though in theory we could help the reader infer that they're a doctor because they're in a lab coat, but that's very contextual. To be verbs may also signal the passive voice, which, while not always a problem like everything else, it is a good thing to be considering if we should be using passive or active voice in these instances. So let's look at some examples. The first one is, I am angry. This sentence is bland and emotionless despite being about a very strong emotion. If your intention is to be deadpan, then it's fine, leave it. You've done a good job. But if that's not your intention, it is far stronger to show that this character is angry. We feel emotions in our bodies, and when we're trying to decipher someone else's emotions, we're looking at their body language and facial expressions far more than we are at them hopefully just saying what they're feeling, though it would be much easier if people did that. So let's bring some sensory immersion and dramatic description to our writing. I have two suggestions, again depending on style and context. The first one, through clenched teeth, I muttered, fine. Or, blood rushed to my face like lava in a volcano. Any second I would burst and scream. The difference between these two options is stark, but they are both far better than I am angry. It will depend heavily on what your piece looks like, about which direction you go, or if you go somewhere in the middle of these are just suggestions. The first introduces action as a way to show that anger, while the second offers more immersion into the character. The first is succinct and kind of low-key, in comparison to the second one, which allows for more evocative writing and a more literary experience. You might also make very different choices if you are talking in the third person, whether close or omniscient. And it would be great practice to consider how you would rewrite this in each of those instances. Let's look at a different example. The gun was shot by Freddy. Passive versus active voice is a very nuanced conversation. The example sentence may be the right use for your circumstance. It puts the emphasis on the gun instead of the shooter, and it slows the pacing. And in many cases, we would want to emphasize the shooter over the action or the weapon used. You could fix this by simply switching up the order of things rather than going object, verb, subject. We want to go subject, verb, object, which would make it Freddy shot the gun. But similarly to Larry running, we have the opportunity to spice things up a bit and throw in a little bit more information. Of course, if it fits our piece. My suggestion. Freddy pulled the trigger, sending the bullet straight through Sandra's chest. So, which option is better? Consider pacing and tension. Freddy shot the gun is quicker than both the original and the more evocative sentence. So if we're in a fast-paced shootout, it's probably the better option. But you may also want to slow this action down and really let the reader take in the consequences of what's happening, in which case the longer sentence might be better. Let's look at our third signpost, through the character, or the words felt, saw, heard, smelled. This is where we're really going to get into that sensory immersion. All of these words filter a sense through the character rather than letting the reader just experience it. You create distance between the reader's experience and these senses by telling them what the character felt, saw, or heard, rather than just letting the textures, sounds, and sights exist in the world around them. Let's look at our first example. I saw the sun rising. Why can't the sun just rise? Why are we choosing to filter this through the character? Now, if you have a reason, again, perfect, leave it. But if not, by starting the sentence with the words I saw, it means the reader didn't. The reader sees the character seeing. Does that make sense? It's subtle, but it really does make a difference in the reader's experience. Consider instead, to the east, the night sky slowly faded into a dull gray. You could tack on as the sun rose. You'll have to decide if you think it being to the east does enough to say that this is a sunrise, or other context in your story says that this is the morning. But the important part is, do you see how the reader and the character are experiencing this together instead of somebody experiencing something that somebody is experiencing? It removes distance and creates an immersive experience, which is what a lot of people are looking for when they're reading. Let's look at another sense. She heard the church bells in the distance. We feel this filter immediately, or at least I do. To me, this evokes the vision of a woman turning around to face where that sound is coming from, rather than me hearing the sound. Again, if there's a reason that this is the way you want your reader to experience your story, that's great. But if not, let's let the reader experience this scene unfiltered. My suggestion, the church bells clanged in the distance. The reader's now focused on hearing the sound instead of watching the character's reaction. Now, if the reaction is the more important part, maybe that's where we go with it. We also bring in a more descriptive verb. And assuming the reader knows the significance of the bells, the emotion is closer. But on that note, I have another suggestion just in case that's not clear. We can add some extra context by changing the sentence to, the church bells chimed, alerting her that the ceremony was beginning. Depending on the information already available to the reader, giving them context that the bells are for a ceremony versus just chiming out the time informs the way they should be reacting. Of course, you have to think about what they already know and whether or not this context causes redundancy. The other thing this does is brings the character back into the picture. We now get to hear the bells and understand the character's reaction without the filter. Let's look at our fourth and final signpost for this video. Past tense verbs exist. Looking for there was or there were. Let things exist just like we let things happen. It will almost always be stronger to say the thing is there or the thing is doing the thing. Using there was creates the same distance as to be and filter words. Now, of course, if there was and there isn't now, you can probably leave it in. Our first example is, there was a man crouching by the car. Not necessarily a bad sentence. There are loads of reasons to leave it as is. The biggest one would be pacing, in my opinion, but even so, there's probably a way to keep the pacing and still make this sentence juicier. Consider how similar this is to the sentence, I saw a man crouching by the car. The obvious fix is a man crouched by the car, but that does immediately quicken the pace, which may not be something we want to do. My suggestion, a man crouched in waiting while Sandy walked past the car. We remove the filler words, add more information, and raise the stakes, all while keeping the length of the sentence and in turn the pacing. Let's take a crack at another one. There were wildflowers covering the field. Again, not necessarily bad. You might keep it this way if you're going for a dreamy, reflective tone. But if this is purely description, we can do better. I briefly mentioned before that using there was or there were gives the illusion of it no longer being. So if we're describing the current scene, it's possible that there will be some confusion about whether or not those flowers are currently there. Now, the ambiguity of this depends a lot on the context, but it is something to keep in mind. A possible fix would read, wildflowers bloomed for miles across the field. It ensures the wildflowers are still there, and it adds a little bit extra information. They're in full bloom. So this may tell us something about the time of year or something else about our story. It may just be good for setting the atmosphere. And you can therefore create differing feelings and tones by mentioning different states of bloom. You could say the summer blooms are wilting, or the buds are just popping, or something else that depicts a slightly different looking wildflower field. There are just more efficient and effective ways to use our limited words that we get on each page. So get more bang for your buck by removing there was or there were. In conclusion, by searching these offenders and critically thinking about your choices, you could remove distance between your story and the reader, therefore creating a more immersive experience, provide more oomph per word, and build a more evocative text. The big takeaway is to let things just exist in your world rather than telling your reader they exist in the world. It's a subtle but impactful difference. And remember, you're not meant to change every instance. This is simply a way for you to search for the signposts and make educated choices about how you want to change your manuscript. Every time you look at one, you want to consider your pacing, tension, impact, and rhythm. In none of these examples is an absolute rule that you have to remove the offending word or phrase.
This is kind of a weird editing Jerica. The cats are making sounds. This is kind of a weird editing Jerica interjection, but I meant to add to my script that I wanted to invite you guys to share some of your troubling sentences in the comments, and I will try to give you some suggestions on how to fix them. If you give me a little bit of context, or maybe like the full paragraph that contains the sentence, the suggestions will probably be a little bit better and fit your manuscript, but just whatever you feel comfortable sharing about that. I'll try to get back to them in the comments, but I will also do a video talking about why I made the changes that I did, if that makes sense. Okay, I think that's it for my interjection.
If this list helped clarify any of the thoughts you had about the show don't tell rule in the past, make sure to like and subscribe, because this is not the only writing tips, tricks, or advice that I have. It's not even the only Control+F suggestions that I have. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, maybe learned a little. I had a blast. Catch you next time. Bye. If this lifts, oh my god, lifts? Finding places we're showing, not telling. Nope. You could fix this by First example is, there was a man what the fuck? A man?